Hi, if you want to watch exclusive content with hot girls that you won't watch on YouTube, namely where Naruto roasts Kushina and Mikoto and many other hot girls without restrictions, then visit my Boosty channel at the link in the description.
The Four Shinobi World War. For words, but how much pain and blood they carry. A war that claimed the lives of countless people, the very best shinobi in every village. Thousands of powerful chunin, hundreds of jonin remained on the battlefield. They would never return. Victory, yes, the alliance won, but at what cost? Many were killed, thousands wounded, hundreds crippled, never to return to action. Even the 5 Kage couldn't escape wounds, albeit uninjured. However, their health suffered significantly in the battle. The oldest among them, Tsuchika Jinoki, retired almost immediately, new injuries piling on old ones, and he began to fail. The others were younger, but their bodies, too, had not fully recovered from the injuries sustained in the battle with Madara. However, they were in no hurry to leave their posts, considering it their duty to serve the people. And now, the Hokage gazes thoughtfully at the report his assistant recently delivered. She frowns, but then nods to herself and puts the scroll aside. "Shizune, call Kakashi, Naruto, and Sai to me," came the short order. "I have a task for them." "Hi, Tsunade-sama," Kato responded immediately, and quickly left her superior's office. It didn't take her long to carry out the order. After all, she could always send a message via couriers, which Genin often served as. Anyway, 20 minutes later, the aforementioned were already standing at attention before the Hokage. "You were called, Hokage-sama." Kakashi, as the eldest, was the first to speak. "Yes." Senjin nodded calmly and pulled a scroll from a pile of documents, the contents of which had prompted her to summon this particular team. "It's a message from Kusa. They've noticed some suspicious activity in the Hozukujo area." "In a shinobi prison?" Naruto exclaimed in surprise, involuntarily taking a step back. "Yes, why?" The Hokage raises an eyebrow mockingly. "No, nothing." Uzumaki mutters discontentedly, feeling a little uncomfortable under the knowing glances of the others. "What's the mission, Beichan?" "Okay." The woman sighed resignedly, feeling a momentary pang of guilt before pushing the unwelcome emotion aside. "As you know, after a series of events, it was seriously damaged. During the war, some of the shinobi there were mobilized, and those who remained were unable to recover from the effects of the Eye of the Moon. The prison is currently mothballed and going through hard times. But the cube is still there. We never destroyed it," Naruto shouted. "How could you leave something like that unguarded?" "Calm down, Naruto." Itachi's heavy hand fell on the overly emotional boy's shoulder. "The villages have few shinobi left," Sai quietly agreed with Kakashi. "They're barely enough to handle the most urgent missions, so spreading our forces thin on secondary ones isn't the best option. But you know that as well as I do. Suspicious chakra flares have been detected in that direction recently." Senjin nods in agreement. "Your mission will be to investigate them." "Cube?" Itachi asks quietly. "It seems so, but the range of the chakra flares is still a little different." The woman shook her head slightly. "That's why I'm sending you 3 to check if you're strong enough to hold out until reinforcements arrive, or if you can cope without them. If anything suspicious appears, report it immediately." "Yes." The 3 men responded in unison. "Check the mission details with Shizune." The Hokage nods in agreement. "You're dismissed." "Hi." The shinobi responded instantly and left the office, Kakashi prudently taking Uzumaki with him, who clearly wanted to clarify something else with the Hokage. They had barely left the office when they bumped into the Hokage's assistant waiting for them. Shizune nodded curtly at Naruto's loud greeting and immediately began answering Kakashi's questions. She couldn't say much, however, merely repeating the Hokage's previous words almost verbatim and wishing them luck in their search. Furthermore, they had been given the go-ahead for a small addition to their team. Sakura and Sasuke would meet them at the Kusa border, and from there, they would decide on a strategy. That was precisely why the trio of shinobi hurried forward, though they tried to conserve their energy. After all, no one knew how their journey would end, and facing the enemy exhausted would be idiotic. The journey through Hinokuni lasted a day, and without the generous chakra of the shinobi Kurama, it would have taken much longer. However, even with his help, they had a difficult time. Fortunately, they were all experienced shinobi, and a day of fast running hadn't worn them down. They managed to reach the meeting point with the missing team members, where they decided to spend the night, so they could set out again in the morning, refreshed. This idea was supported by everyone, even the unusually gloomy Uzumaki, who had never been known for his patience. However, the war had changed him, instilled in him a greater sense of prudence, and taught him patience, albeit at great cost. The next morning, the expanded team set out. It took them a couple of hours to reach Kusa's prison as stealthily as possible. Fortunately, the Hokage had already contacted the local authorities, and there were no problems crossing the sea. However, they began further afield, as no one wanted to enter the prison island, and the Konoha shinobi team had nothing to do. They disembarked and agreed to be picked up within 24 hours. This would be just enough time to survey the Hozukujo and neutralize the threat. However, to be on the safe side, Kakashi had discussed a few things beforehand, such as the signals he and the ship's crew would exchange before finally releasing the ship. "Kakashi-sensei, where do we start?" Naruto asked impatiently, tired of doing nothing, but he'd already learned not to rush into the thick of things. Try scanning the area," Ataki commanded curtly. "Sai, you do some reconnaissance with your ink beasts. Sakura, you stay with Naruto and Sai, and Sasuke and I will survey the Hozukujo courtyard." "Hi," came the unanimous reply, and everyone set about their assigned tasks. Naruto settled into the lotus position and began scanning the area. Sai drew small mice and concentrated on controlling his jutsu, and Sakura quickly began setting up an observation post in place of the empty outpost at the prison entrance. She reasoned that even if they found nothing inside the Hozukujo and were able to spend the night outside the imposing walls, someone would still have to be left behind to keep watch over the sea. Otherwise, they risked missing the ship's arrival. To be continued. Meeting About half an hour passes before Kakashi and Sasuke return to their post. Naruto and Sai have already freed themselves and exchanged information, agreeing that there's nothing of value on the surface, but something strange is hidden in the dungeons of the Hozukujo. However, to be sure, they'd have to get closer, which is what they planned to do after the scouts arrived. "Oh, Kakashi-sensei, Sasuke-kun," Sakura called quietly. "Did you find anything?" "The surface is clear." Ataki nodded in response. "We can move on. What's up?" "I've detected some strange things underground, roughly where the cube should be." Naruto was the first to respond. "My scouts couldn't get that far." Sai shrugged. "Understood." Kakashi nods briefly and immediately adds, "Naruto, leave a couple of clones on duty and let's go." "Hi." Uzumaki responded in agreement, forming a cross-shaped seal with his hands. But as soon as the clones appeared in a cloud of smoke, a terrible roar was heard, and the island shook noticeably. It was so unexpected that the clones that appeared lost their footing and dispersed upon impact with the ground. For a moment, the shinobi sensed the presence of chakra, so similar to the chakra of the monster from Cube, and then everything disappeared. "What was that?" Sakura asked, confused. "I don't know, but it's worth checking," Ataki commanded decisively. "Naruto, leave the clones here and leave a couple more to collect natural energy." "Hi, Kakashi-sensei." The blonde nodded, his expression serious, and soon a dozen clones appeared next to them. 2 remained at their post, 3 more sat down in a meditative pose, and the remaining 5 quickly scattered in different directions. "Naruto," Ataki frowned with displeasure. "They'll circle the island along the cliffs, Kakashi-sensei." Uzumaki explained his actions immediately. Don't worry, I know this island. A crooked smile appeared for a second and then disappeared. My clones will be able to sneak in undetected. No sensor will detect it. Okay, Kakashi agreed, still dissatisfied. Let's move out, but be careful. Yes, his team members responded. A shinobi must be stealthy. That was, perhaps, the motto under which the team's further advance proceeded. Carefully and quietly, they glided like shadows parallel to the road that led to the prison gates. They were wary and kept a watchful eye on their surroundings. They disliked the silence that had descended upon them. It seemed as if it had always been like this here. Only the whistling wind and the buildings, already beginning to crumble. However, some of them had simply been half destroyed by a battle that had taken place here a couple of years ago and had never been restored. Not a single sound broke the silence of this place. Eerie. Especially for those who knew the secret this place held. Suddenly, a terrible roar was heard, and one of the dilapidated buildings collapsed, but somehow strangely. A moment before the collapse, Naruto detected a faint echo of familiar chakra, and then everything was obscured by a rising cloud of dust. The team began exchanging glances, noticing Uzumaki's signals and reading the hidden alarm in the message. No one knew who their best sensor had detected, but no one expected anything good from this prison. However, there was no choice. They were sent here for a reason. They simply had to find out what was going on. If they failed, no one else would be able to handle it, and the Kage would simply be wary of sending people into this place. Kakashi signals Sai to send the painted animals out on reconnaissance. He nods silently and takes out his drawing supplies, and soon a flock of ink mice scurries toward the dust cloud. Nothing happens for a few seconds, then they return, and Sai relays a message that there are people there, but a stone barrier is preventing them from getting close. It seems one of the intruders possesses the Doton. Now all that remains is to figure out who has come to the empty Hozukujo and why. Perhaps the second question troubled Kakashi even more than Naruto, who suddenly realized who he sensed in the dust cloud. However, no one rushes forward. The Konoha shinobi spread out around the collapsed building, trying to conceal their chakra as much as possible. They mustn't reveal their presence prematurely. Cough! As soon as the dust settled a bit, a wild cough rang out. Baka Kakashi, why did you drop your guard so quickly? Came the reply, a sound all too familiar to Naruto and Sakura. Obito, Kakashi warned us, you just need to be more careful. A clear girl's voice gently scolded. But, the first voice tried to object, but at that very second it burst into a wild cough again. Stop arguing. A pleasant male voice now sounded. We need to look around and figure out where we've ended up. It's your fault, Obito, by the way. A cold, boyish voice remarked sarcastically. Why did you grab that thing? Yes, I did. The boy snapped back at the accusation. Stop it, both of you, the girl said angrily, and at that moment, the smoke cleared, revealing for people to the surprised Konoha shinobi. 3 Jonin and a Jonin, judging by their chakra. The Jonin carefully squatted down and touched the ground. However, what surprised them was something else. They knew this group. Each of the Godain sent ninja involuntarily attempted to lift the Jinjutsu, but no matter how many times they performed the seal enchanted Kai, the spell wouldn't dissipate. Before them stood Namikaze Minato and his young students. This was certain to all members of Team 7. They had seen the photograph on the nightstand in their mentor's room, and Naruto had an identical one, inherited from his parents' house. However, Uzumaki wasn't sure just because of this. He simply sensed the chakra, and could tell with absolute certainty that it was his father standing before him. And the short, silver-haired boy possessed the same chakra as his sensei. And the black-haired teenager, wearing clothes with the Uchiha clan symbol on the back, reminded him very much of Obito, who had sacrificed his life to save him during the war. Only his chakra was a little different, but that wasn't surprising, since he hadn't yet received the damage that resulted in half of his body being made up of Hashirama's cells. quiet! Namikaze commanded unexpectedly, straightening up. We have guests. Sensei? The children immediately stood back to back, forgetting their squabbles. Would you like to show yourself? The blond man casually stood in front of his students. They would have even believed his relaxed demeanor if his hand hadn't frozen in front of his pouch. The Jonin was ready to attack at any moment. Okay. Kakashi stepped forward, Shinobi prepared to attack. Who are you? I don't remember you, Namikaze remarked warily. The other four should come out too. Okay. Kakashi nods in agreement and signals to his hidden subordinates to come out of hiding as well. Who are you? Minato freezes, eyeing the four who've appeared out of nowhere with suspicion. He knows he's trapped. His chakra is running low, he has a limited number of kunai, and he can't sense his old marks. If he didn't have children with him, there might be other options, but as it is, there's no choice. He can only hope these shinobi aren't enemies. And the fact that he doesn't know them, who knows how many shinobi there are in Konoha? Even he can't know them all. The only thing that contradicted that was the fact that he'd sensed their strength. All five were Jonin, one was an Uchiha, and the other reminded him of Kushina. His chakra was just as dual component. We are Konoha shinobi, and have come here on the Hokage's orders. The eldest of the platinum-haired boys responded briefly. Here? Came the confused voice of a dark-haired boy from behind. Hazukijo, Sai said emotionlessly. A prison for criminals, destroyed a couple of years ago, Naruto added sullenly. It hurt him to look at his father and not be able to talk to him. Impossible. He wasn't a child anymore, but a grown shinobi, and Kurama had explained to him in simple terms how his meddling in history could end. And Sasuke was glaring at him, his red eyes flashing. What? Was the answer to their words. I suggest you join our search, and then return to Konoha together, Sasuke remarked quietly. I guess we have no choice, right? Minato tilted his head thoughtfully. No, Uchiha confirmed his thoughts. Okay. The blonde-haired Jonin nods in agreement, and the indignant Uchiha teenager is calmed by his teammate. There's almost a whole day left until the ship arrives to take them back to land. Namikaze Minato was a calm man, not phlegmatic. He'd simply had a good education. Even in the orphanage, he'd learned that if he wanted to achieve something, he had to put in the effort. His natural curiosity allowed him to find information in books, and if he didn't understand, he could always ask the elderly librarian or one of the caregivers. However, he soon realized that theoretical knowledge wasn't all a young shinobi needed. The former orphanage students who occasionally visited them, as well as the caregivers and the elderly librarian, also spoke of this. The boy grew up absorbing the words of others, but at the same time, he tried to think things through and draw conclusions. This was what the orphanage life had taught him. It also taught him patience, and the knowledge that not everything could be his way. He strove for knowledge, but received only crumbs. He was not upset, honing what was available to him to unprecedented heights, and dreamed that they would give him more at the academy. The time came for the academy, but little changed for the orphan. Sure, he'd gained more knowledge. His access to scrolls had increased, but it still wasn't enough. Minato could see clearly that those who had the opportunity to train with adult shinobi at home absorbed the material faster and spent far less time mastering it. Sure, they couldn't explain the exercises as much as he could without stumbling over trivialities. But they spent less time mastering them, leaving them more time for everything else. And it didn't matter that they wasted their time on nonsense. It didn't make things any easier for him. However, being a relatively calm and gentle child, he didn't envy them, instead trying to devote more time to training, sometimes disguising it as games. This earned him a reputation as a troublemaker, but he was fine with it, especially since it was a good way to understand how far he was falling behind the others and to see where he could improve. Perhaps he would have remained an ordinary, albeit diligent, boy if things had continued this way. The turning point came in his third year, when a red-haired girl from the Uzumaki clan transferred to them, an outsider who refused to bend to the others. She didn't fit in right away, but immediately drew attention. Too loud, proud, but lonely. She reminded Namikaze of himself, seemingly close to everyone yet aloof. Yes, unlike him, she had relatives, but at the same time, she had been torn from her family, taken hundreds of kilometers to another village, her care entrusted to an elderly relative. And while he sincerely respected Uzumaki Mito, as did the rest of the village, he understood perfectly well that she was no substitute for family for Kushina. In the end, she seemed to have loved ones, but the situation was painfully similar to his own. Mito-sama was a mentor, a tutor, but not a parent to Kushina. However, what impressed him most was how resilient the newcomer was. Despite the bullying, she never gave up. Even when something wasn't working, she tried her best. Even the news of her clan's village's destruction didn't break her. She simply worked even harder. He enjoyed watching her. It took him a while to start a conversation or even become friends with the temperamental Uzumaki. However, now he had a goal and a dream, not some abstract one, like becoming Hokage and protecting everyone. It was real, constantly flickering before his eyes. He admired the crimson-haired girl and, after some time, managed to find common ground with her. Kind, yet capable of turning into a true fury in an instant, she was a loyal comrade and friend. She was eager to chat about any topic and helped with anything he didn't understand. Or rather, if she didn't understand a question herself, she would ask others for answers and never forget to share them with her friend. It was Kushina who introduced him to the fascinating world of Fuinjutsu, sharing information with ease and freedom. She lacked the reserve inherent in every shinobi in Konoha. She was open. This was captivating, and Namikaze himself didn't even notice how his simple desire to make friends gave way to childish infatuation. If he'd previously trained and learned new things to become stronger, now he eagerly showed his skills to Uzumaki and sought her advice. Just to see someone else's admiration and excitement. Who knew that this would help him in the future? Their friendship was noticed. A Jinchuriki's entourage and their attachments are closely monitored. He was deemed capable, but too weak. Now he was being given more than scraps of knowledge, and the Academy senseis began to show interest and concern. They helped him more readily, offering to stay for extra classes, explaining his mistakes. Gradually, the label of genius began to stick with him, and when he graduated, one of the Sannin took on the task of training his team. An unprecedented stroke of luck, which he managed to use wisely, quickly gaining strength and experience. Many doors began to open for him, but he considered the most important thing to be the fact that he was allowed to study the second Hokage's ninjutsu, and even helped to perfect it. It was thanks to this that he was able to earn a resounding name and attain Jonin status. Soon, he was given a team to train, a challenging and at the same time promising one. He approached their training with the utmost responsibility, striving to make them a team. Things weren't going so well, but he didn't lose hope. Training, joint missions, all of it was gradually forcing them to mature, just like the ongoing war. "Minato-san, the Hokage is calling for you." A short Genin messenger landed next to the thoughtful Jonin. "Okay." Namikaze nods briefly and disappears in a yellow flash, only to appear moments later in front of the residence and enter. A couple more minutes, and he's knocking on the ruler's office door. "You called, Hokage-sama?" "Oh, Minato, come in," came the immediate response, and the fair-haired Jounin stepped inside the office. "You're just in time. There's a mission for you. It's very important for Konoha." "What will it consist of?" Minato asked cautiously, not liking the thought of leaving his Genin team unsupervised. "Ruins were discovered near Rorin. A search party sent there found a box full of records with strange symbols. It was decided to transport them to Konoha and give them to Kushina to decipher," the Hokage replied, puffing thoughtfully on his pipe. "Sending her there herself, alas, is impossible. Your task is to deliver the valuable cargo to the village." "It sounds too easy," Minato said thoughtfully. "The team is trapped, surrounded by a detachment from Suna. Sarutobi nodded in agreement. Not very strong, but we don't have any extra forces, and we can't send reinforcements. You'll get the full details from my assistant when you leave. Can I bring my team? Namikaze asked cautiously, mentally weighing their options. Their chances were pretty good. After all, Kakashi would soon be promoted to Jonin, and Obito had become a Chunin a month ago. The only thing was Rin. Well, she hadn't achieved Chunin status only because she hadn't pursued it, preferring to focus on Iryojutsu. It's up to you. I don't mind. The Hokage nodded in agreement, completely losing interest in his interlocutor. You can go. Hi. Minato responded, heading for the exit. He still needed to carefully study the information he'd gathered. Fortunately, there had been no problem obtaining it, but that wasn't the case. Judging by the information, it appeared that a team of 5 people was trapped in the ruins, and 24 were blocking them. 3 were puppets of average strength, and the rest were ordinary fighters. According to the intelligence, 1 or 2 of them were Jonin. There was no point in disbelieving them, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his subordinates wouldn't be able to handle the puppets. However, his doubts were quickly allayed by Kushina, who asked how long he would continue to act like a mother hen toward the children. He had to admit she was right and informed the team of the new mission. To the Jonin's great relief, the mission itself went smoothly. They were able to arrive to their comrades' aid in time and even eliminated their opponents quietly and, most importantly, without injury. Fortunately, his sensory abilities were unimpaired in the sand, so he quickly located the most dangerous opponents for his students, the puppeteers, and then eliminated them. Obito and Kakashi dealt with the rest without difficulty, as did Rin, who had proven herself a capable medic nin. The delivery of the box covered in strange seals, and the unusual necklace covered in similarly incomprehensible symbols, which the search party found long after they sent the message for help, went smoothly. Minato's team even stayed a little longer to help the search party reach the nearest camp and receive appropriate medical attention, after which they set off on their return journey. And everything would have been fine if Kakashi and Obito hadn't started arguing again during their rest stop. The Uchiha was fiddling with the box. The amulet they'd been given with it lay nearby, and pondering its purpose, while Hatake snorted contemptuously and pointed out the idiocy of his reasoning. Basically, it was business as usual. Minato, with a clear conscience, helped his student prepare a hot lunch, occasionally asking his students to be quiet. Namikaze hadn't expected the boys to start fighting, and the box Obito had set aside would fall to the ground, spilling records and landing on top of them, along with a strange pendant. Nothing alarming or unusual happened, so they quickly collected the fallen items, slamming the box shut, and were reaching for the pendant when it began to glow. Minato and Kakashi were the first to react, simply jumping back. But the curious Obito reached for the strange object. None of his comrades, rushing forward, had time to stop him. A bright flash blinded everyone, and as soon as they blinked, they realized they were in a dilapidated building, which had begun to collapse as they approached. Kakashi saved the situation by blocking everyone with a wall of earth, though it didn't last long. However, no one except Obito suffered any discomfort, managing to keep the dust from getting into their noses and eyes. What was even stranger was that Minato didn't recognize this place, nor the people who immediately appeared to greet him. The brief conversation yielded almost no results. The Konoha shinobi, if their words and the Hitai they wore were to be believed, didn't even reveal their names, preferring to communicate only with gestures common in the leaf. The second nuisance was the frankly strange looks the shinobi constantly cast their way. No, they didn't express overt aggression. Rather, they hinted at disbelief, and the blue-eyed, blonde-haired man with the stripes on his cheeks also showed a hint of hidden pain. Given a choice, Namikaze would have preferred not to associate with this group, but alas, he had no choice. He couldn't abandon his subordinates, and there was nowhere to hide from the island. However, this situation couldn't continue, for despite the proposal voiced by the black-haired man, with the Uchiha clanmon on his back to join forces in a search for who knows what. No one was in any hurry to begin. The shinobi stood tensely before each other. "Would you introduce yourself? I'm not sure what to call you." Obito was the first to break the tense silence, tired of inaction and seeing no obvious danger. The boy's energetic nature demanded action, and the shinobi standing across from them was making him nervous. Hom. The eldest of those present, the platinum blonde, drawled. "Sensei, he's right." The blue-eyed blonde grimaced with displeasure, casting a darkened gaze over Minato's team. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto, and yes, anticipating your question, I am related to Uzumaki Kushina quite closely. Haruno Sakura." The second girl to introduce herself was the one with short pink hair. "Sai," one of the brunettes said laconically and emotionlessly. "Uchiha Sasuke." The boy with the Uchiha clanmon on his back responded shortly. "You're lying!" Obito immediately protested. "There's no one by that name in the clan." "PFF." The black-haired man glared at his clansman with annoyance, his eyes marked with 3 tomo. "My name is Kakashi." The older platinum blonde boy interrupted the argument, casting a disgruntled glance at the boy. "You don't need to introduce yourself. We know your names." "Okay." Minato nods, a hint of confusion flickering in his eyes. He doesn't like how much these shinobi know, nor does he like the fact that he can't change anything. "Well, now that we've met, I suggest we split into pairs and comb the area." The jonin who'd introduced himself as Kakashi glanced sternly at everyone, then settled on those he'd never expected to see alive. "Our mission is to verify the integrity of the cube and search for any traces of its activity. Kunoichi, I suggest we leave the arrangements for the night. We won't be able to leave the island before tomorrow anyway. The rest of you will go in pairs with one of us, as we don't know what to look for." "Agreed?" "Yes." Minato agreed after a slight hesitation, reminding himself once again that they had no choice. The search and inspection of the area took quite a while, finishing in the late afternoon. However, they would have been able to complete the task more quickly if Obito hadn't rebelled when his sensei agreed to work together. He wasn't particularly opposed to it, but his only gripe was that Rin had to remain outside, alone with the unknown Kunoichi. The argument could have gone on for a long time, but Naruto had had enough of it, so he simply grabbed him by the collar and smiled tenderly, looking into his eyes. Many could have sworn they glowed red for a few seconds, resembling the eyes of a wild beast. This was enough to calm the rambunctious Uchiha, and he meekly agreed to go search the Hazukijo, but in the company of his unknown relative. Apparently, he considered it the safest option for his sanity, although 5 minutes later he regretted his decision. Having reassembled after searching and exploring the dilapidated prison, the newly formed team dined on food cooked up by the Kunoichi left behind and retired to rest, posting guards. Minato, wary of his new acquaintances, left a clone of himself as backup and considered erecting a barrier over their sleeping bags, but later dismissed the idea. It was too suspicious, and he was already under surveillance. He hadn't even managed to place his markers around the Hazukiju, though he was able to confirm that it was, as he was constantly being watched, and he didn't want to exacerbate the situation by further demonstrating his distrust. Their team was already walking a tightrope, completely at the mercy of these shinobi. However, to his surprise, they didn't press their advantage, and the night passed without incident, as did the rest of the afternoon on the island, until the arrival of the ship that would take them to the other shore. The shinobi who met them were simply combing the island for a second time, checking the mysterious black cube located in the Hazukujo dungeon. Minato even allowed himself to be distracted for a moment, watching with interest the blonde Uzumaki, who was carefully inscribing a series of seals on the walls of the room, clearly intending to create a strong barrier that would restrict access to the cube. Namikaze immediately noticed the boy's inexperience and the fact that in many ways he relied purely on intuition and luck, but he remained silent, not interfering with his work, even though he wanted to ask about Kushina. He was even annoyed that he had never heard her mention such a relative before. His head ached from intense contemplation, though it wasn't just that. The dispersed clone he'd left on night duty had taken a good toll on his brain, leaving him with mild fatigue and the beginnings of a headache that was now developing into a migraine. So he was relieved to hear they were finished, followed by word that a ship's sail was visible on the horizon. Minato-sensei! As soon as he stepped onto the deck and found a vacant seat under the strange gazes of the ship's crew, all of his students appeared next to Namikaze. Yes, Obito? Namikaze sighed, mentally glad that his protege had already recovered from Naruto's clear demonstration of his superiority over him. Don't you think this company is strange? Even though his student was whispering, the Jonin had no doubt that everyone listening in had heard their conversation perfectly well, but it was unlikely he would be silenced. This was evident in his warlike gaze, and not only his. What exactly? Namikaze asked wearily, erecting a rather slender barrier against eavesdropping. It wouldn't prevent lip reading, but at least the ship's crew would remain unaware of the contents of their conversation. Yes, at least that blonde guy. Obito waved his hands emotionally. He looks like you, but his personality is worse than Kushina-san's. The boy doesn't notice his mentor's disapproving narrowing of eyes at these words and continues. Or that Uchiha Sasuke. I don't have a shinobi by that name in my clan. And the one who called himself Kakashi? He dresses and acts just like Baka Kakashi. He points a disgruntled finger at his teammate, and is immediately met with a disapproving look. Obito, Minato sighed resignedly. I understand your doubts, but we have little choice. We must return to Konoha and complete our mission. But the boy clearly didn't want to calm down. They didn't show any aggression, and their goals coincide with ours, the Jounin said, interrupting his student's objections with a gesture. Besides, in case you haven't realized, Obito, Kakashi remarked sarcastically, all 5 are Jonin, and dealing with them won't be easy. I'll manage, but you didn't even get your Chunin vest right away. What? The offended Uchiha exploded. Now, calm down, both of you. Rin tried to defuse the situation. Obito, I'm sure Kakashi didn't mean to insult you, and I have to admit, I can't handle a Jonin either. Sakura-sen is very strong, and she said there are even stronger ninja on their team. When did you manage to do that? Kakashi narrowed his eyes suspiciously, turning in her direction. Kakashi, don't mess with Rin. His teammate immediately appeared in front of him. While you were searching through the ruins, Noera responded, gently restraining Obito, who was seething with indignation. Sakura-san and I had a good chat. She's a medic-nin like me, and we found a lot of common ground. The girl's gaze grew dreamy, and she added, she knows so much. Did she share her knowledge with you? Minato asked with interest, giving a small plus to the theory that they were his own, but he just didn't know them. He couldn't explain such generosity any other way, after all. Yes, Rin nodded contentedly. And she even told me a little about her teammates. She added quickly, noticing their interest. Nothing special, just confirmed their names and told me about some of their missions as Genin. I specifically asked around about Konoha. If she hasn't lived there, she's certainly been there more than once, and she answers with great confidence. I did, however, like what she said about us not recognizing her when we get back. She paused for a moment, then perked up. But she knows so much, and she said she learned Iryo Jutsu from Tsunade-sama herself. Sinjoheim? Minato raised an eyebrow in surprise, recalling that she had never recovered from her fiancé's death, deciding to travel despite the war. She rarely visited Konoha, but she had agreed to help cover the gap at the Suna front, albeit not immediately. However, he couldn't recall anyone ever mentioning any student other than Kata Shizun, the niece of Kata Dan, who was the fiancée of the legendary loser. Yes, the girl nods enthusiastically. She knows her works by heart and easily answers my questions that arose after reading them. She even gives examples. Then we'll assume they're from Konoha. Minato remarked calmly, noticing out of the corner of his eye that Naruto, who had been standing at the bow of the ship, had begun to move in their direction, until we have evidence to the contrary. Sensei. Obito was indignant. Hi, Sensei. Kakashi and Ren responded in unison. What? The guy looked indignantly at his teammates, who agreed with the coach's words. Obito, that's an order, Namikaze said, smiling softly to soften the harshness of his words. Hi. The boy agreed with a disgruntled sigh. But I'll still keep an eye on them. I don't mind. Minato agreed, resisting the urge to shake his head in disapproval. Just don't overdo it, Obito. Are you finished? Naruto's mocking voice rang out over their heads, and only then did Minato's students notice that their privacy had been violated. What do you want? Obito shouted, hands on his hips, rather aggressively. I wanted to warn you that we'll be at the shore in 5 minutes. Uzumaki grinned, causing Namikaze to narrow his eyes warily. After all, he hadn't removed the eavesdropping barrier. So what? The boy asked, arms crossed over his chest, stubbornly hiding a hint of fear. Naruto's outburst of irritation on Hazukijo Island hadn't gone unnoticed under his aggression. We won't wait for a port. We'll leave close to the shore. Uzumaki chuckled. I hope everyone can walk on water. Yes, you. Obito, already a Chunin, exploded, deeply offended. Someone was doubting his ability to perform the exercises every Genin should know. So everyone. Naruto grinned wickedly, looking like a fox. Well, if not, don't worry. I can create a clone and carry you like a Heim. He paused meaningfully and added, in my arms? I'll kill you. Minato barely manages to intercept the enraged Obito. He sighs resignedly. Calming his student is no easy task. He's too emotional and completely out of control. And you wouldn't say he's an Uchiha. He's completely different, completely unlike his clansmen. Sensei, you haven't removed the barrier, have you? Kakashi interrupts Obito's admonitions. Taken aback, the Uchiha freezes almost immediately, and their gazes lock on the ash-haired teenager. Yes, Namikaze agrees. Then how did he hear us, Sensei? Kakashi asked, frowning at them in response. And he approached so quietly that I didn't even notice him. I have only one explanation. He has a lot of chakra. Minato noted wearily. He didn't remove the barrier, but it's not that complicated. All he had to do was pump more chakra into his ears, and hearing us wouldn't have been a problem. Shouldn't he be more noticeable then? Kakashi asks grimly. He could just read Obito's lips, Ren noted. Or both. Namikaze agreed with his student's conclusions. Hey, you! Naruto's loud voice, which was actually the culprit in the first place, interrupted their argument. It's time. Let's go. Minato Uzumaki concluded the discussion. We shouldn't keep them waiting. Hi, Sensei. His students agreed, obediently heading toward the waiting shinobi. They couldn't run away and hide now, and what was the point? While they were headed for Konoha, it was advantageous for them to travel in a large group. For now, it was best to lie low and prepare. They could always engage in battle. Although Namikaze desperately wanted that to happen, the chance of losing at least one of his students was too great. He didn't want that, not at all. The journey to Konoha for Minato's team was strange. Namikaze couldn't help but notice numerous discrepancies between what he'd seen before and what he was seeing now. It wasn't that he was measuring the heights of the trees. It was simply that in some places the landscape had changed dramatically, revealing the presence of large-scale battles. In other places, on the contrary, everything was so overgrown that it seemed as if no human had ever set foot there. And most importantly, he saw no traces of an ongoing war, but there were many that had already occurred. Deserted villages, abandoned farmland, slowly but inexorably overgrown with forest. They seemed to be walking through Hinokuni territory, but Minato didn't recognize it. This was his homeland, and yet it seemed foreign at the same time. Doubts were increasingly gripping the Jonin, and not only him. Even the ever-fidgety Obito had quieted down, now warily glancing around and keeping a suspicious eye on something Naruto had done that had offended him, In fact, Namikaze knew perfectly well what had offended him, but he was in no hurry to intervene. Kakashi kept glaring unreadably at the adult Kakashi and Sasuke, and Sai's unfortunate jokes only fueled the paranoia. The situation was tense, and the only ones who weren't paying attention were the girls, Rin and Sakura. They were the ones who were enjoying everything. Minato suppressed a tired sigh with difficulty. He was fed up with his inability to relax. Too often had he had to rein in the overbearing Obito and apologize to the blonde Uzumaki for him. The most surprising thing was that, despite his scowl, Obito listened and even obeyed him. At least when he tried to appeal to his reason and the fact that he was his student senior, Obito nodded silently and walked away, while Obito continued to rant. The Namikaze was even more exhausted by the clones he created daily and for all night. He still didn't trust the shinobi, and they understood this. Surprisingly, they didn't comment or hinder him. However, the headache the next morning, when he dispelled them, killed any good mood. Surely, the next day had arrived, and they were still alive. In general, the journey was a torment for Minato. The only thing that made him happy was that they would soon reach their home village. Konoha appeared before the tired Jonin's eyes 5 days later, and he couldn't help but frown. It was like she was there, and yet it wasn't. The scene from a distance was the same, but the details were different. Even so, he was glad to be back home, but he didn't let his guard down. On the contrary, he decided to keep a closer eye on his companions, so he could react to any problems, but they didn't do anything. They acted as if they had already returned home. It was immediately obvious they had relaxed. However, Minato wasn't quick to fall for their deceptively calm expressions. He knew all too well what experienced Jonin, who had been through the war, were capable of. And they had made it through. It was evident in their looks, their movements. He didn't want to take any risks, and he was even glad that his fears had been unfounded. They had entered the village without incident. "Oh, Naruto, I see you're back!" A boy jumped out of the booth where the inspectors usually sat. Not an Uchiha, Namikaze automatically noted. Strange. As far as he remembered, their presence was mandatory. They checked passers-by for oddities, caught spies. "Not just me, Kotetsu Izumo." Naruto smiled widely, coming closer. Yes, we see." A second guy appeared from the booth. "We remember your team. I've already written them down. What about the others?" "Oh, meet Namikaze Minato, Uchiha Obito, Hatake Kakashi, Noara Rin," Uzumaki responded, rubbing his palms joyfully. "What?" His interlocutors exhaled in unison, their eyes turning into huge circles. "Dope," Sasuke, who had been silent until then, said discontentedly. "So write it down, and we'll go to the Biachan." The blonde's eyes gleamed slyly, and he added mockingly, "And yes, secrecy, you understand?" Of course. Izumo and Kotetsu nodded immediately, but Minato wasn't considered one of Konoha's top jonin for nothing. He could easily see in their eyes that soon everyone the gatekeepers knew would know this secret. Judging by Naruto's grin, though, it didn't bother him in the least. "Guys, Biachan!" Uzumaki grinned, and the faces of Izumo and Kotetsu immediately changed, becoming doomed. "Yes, we already understand, Naruto Gogo." To be convincing, they even waved their hands, showing the way. "Let's go," the adult Kakashi said, noticing that Uzumaki was about to say something else, and Naruto immediately shut his mouth, looking sideways at the teacher with displeasure, but not arguing with him. They walked further, and Minato's team, led by him, frowns deeper and deeper with each step. They don't like what they see. The first difference they noticed, barely breaking away from staring at the gatekeepers and stepping inside the village, was the rock with the Hokage's faces. There were 5 of them. 5, not 3. Then there were more. The village itself was different. It was located in a pit that Namikaze couldn't recall. It looked as if the village had been destroyed by a Bijidama and then rebuilt on the same spot, with the walls slightly smoothed out. However, all the buildings seemed, although fairly new, lived in, something that doesn't happen in a couple of days. Minato frowned, trying to figure out what the catch was, noticing that everyone knew their companions and greeted them with smiles, bowing respectfully before turning their gaze to him and turning deathly pale. And most importantly, nowhere, absolutely nowhere, were there any Uchiha patrols in sight, nor were there any Uchiha themselves. The only person they encountered from that clan was Uchiha Sasuke, who was walking with them. This oddity was too striking for the fair-haired Jonin. "Minato-sensei!" Obito tugged at the thoughtful Jounin's sleeve. "What about Obito?" Namikaze exhales wearily. "Does anything seem strange to you?" The boy nods toward the blonde Uzumaki, who is greeted with a dazzling smile by yet another girl, while his father, standing nearby, nods approvingly. However, as soon as they look at them, they turn pale and quickly say goodbye. "Really?" Kakashi, who was walking next to him, whispered venomously. "Were you able to see the strangeness, Obito? Let's talk about this later." Minato interrupted the student's argument with a tired sigh. "The right decision," Sasuke remarks calmly, casting an indifferent glance in their direction. "Hokage-sama will decide what to tell you." "Tisk!" Obito blurted out discontentedly, clearly not liking the unaccounted relative. "Obito, that was rude." Rin gently chides him, bowing apologetically to Sasuke. "Forgive him, it's just nerves." Comes the answer, and he turns away from Namikaze's students with indifference. "Rin, you don't have to apologize for this." Obito immediately flares up, trying to shield the girl with his body, catching the frankly mocking gaze of blue eyes that are so similar to his mentor's. "Obito," Minato interrupted the argument before it even started, realizing they wouldn't achieve anything good this way. It wasn't in their best interests to act provocatively, especially since he was already beginning to suspect what kind of pendant his student had activated and where they were. The Jonin didn't know how to handle this knowledge. On the one hand, he could learn the future and change it, but on the other, it was dangerous, because who knows what the consequences for the world might be. "But sensei!" Obito huffed, offended, not understanding why he wasn't allowed to stand up for his teammate. "Stop it, you're acting like a child," Kakashi remarked, who, unlike his teammate, had long since understood his mentor's motives. He was perfectly aware of why Obito was nervous and ruder than usual, but he was too used to analyzing everything, and his comrade's impulsiveness irritated him. "You?" Obito exploded, deeply offended. He was trying to show them that they couldn't trust these scoundrels, and they were ignoring his efforts. The boy was genuinely offended by such disregard for his opinion. He didn't understand why his mentor had even agreed with these shinobi. He didn't like the changed Konoha, and he was even more indignant at the unfamiliar blonde Uzumaki, who reminded him too much of Kushina-san, but with his sensei's appearance. Now, calm down." Noera tried to influence her teammates. "Does this happen to you often?" Sakura quietly asked Minato, who sighed wearily as she came closer. "Yes, it happens." Namikaze smiles weakly. "Sorry about that." "It's okay. You haven't seen how Naruto and Sasuke acted as kids." The kunoichi laughed. "They were very noisy." "Sakura-chan." Naruto immediately protested, jumping closer. "What? Can you tell me what was wrong?" Haruno looked at him, laughing cheerfully. "Team just irritated me with his arrogance." Uzumaki immediately protested, his behavior strikingly reminiscent of Obito. "Dope." Sasuke looked at him darkly. "It was you who irritated me with your idiocy, but I tolerated it." "Really? And who?" Uzumaki immediately started talking. "Well, do you see?" Sakura asked cheerfully, interrupting the blonde with her question and making him notice that they weren't alone. "Sakura-chan!" The boy flared up. "What?" the kunoichi asked, smiling sweetly and cracking her knuckles. "It's nothing, we're just here," Uzumaki muttered, pointing to the building towering before them. "Oh, right," the girl rejoiced. "Let's go. I'm sure Hokage-sama is waiting for us." No one argued with her, following like silent shadows after Sakura, who had decisively thrown open the door. Everyone wanted to finish their business as quickly as possible, while others simply wanted to confirm their suspicions. A couple of minutes pass in silence, though Minato is unnerved by the unusually crowded hallways of the residence. It seems half the village has gathered there to witness their arrival. Moreover, most of the faces are unfamiliar, and all wear leaf Hittite. Namikaze is becoming increasingly convinced of the theory that he had previously dismissed as delusional. The amulet really was complex. All that remains is to obtain one last piece of evidence to confirm his claim. Minato watches silently as Naruto opens the door to the Hokage's office and barges in without even asking permission. "Bachan, we're back!" he joyfully announces to everyone nearby, drawing groans of anguish from his teammates. Naruto doesn't care about their reactions. He wants to get rid of this unexpected discovery as quickly as possible. It's too painful for him to see his father alive and well. It was a real challenge for him to spend so many days traveling side by side with him and not give himself away in any way. "I see," a familiar voice said discontentedly, and Namikaze took a step forward, only to freeze in shock as soon as he crossed the threshold. He hadn't expected to see this particular person. "Tsunade-sama?" he blurts out in amazement. He's so stunned that he doesn't see the curiosity in Naruto's gaze, but Shinja does, knowing full well that she'll have a lot to tell her grandson later. And even she can't predict the consequences of that conversation, though she's 100% certain it won't happen. However, her face doesn't reflect these thoughts. "Oh, Minato, I didn't believe it." The blonde woman, who is sitting in the place where Namikaze is used to seeing the Sandaime Hokage, grins. "But how?" Minato asked, stuttering slightly. "We would like to know that ourselves," someone's lazy voice calmly remarked. "Shikaku?" The blonde stared at the young man, almost immediately realizing he was mistaken. "I'm his son," Nara calmly remarked and even yawned, so infectiously that everyone present felt the urge to imitate him. "Son?" Minato asked, a little hesitantly, then chuckled. "So my assumptions about us traveling to the future are correct. That's both good and bad. Well, since you've already figured that out, Minato, it'll be easier." Shinja nodded contentedly. "As you understand, we won't tell you about the past. It's too dangerous." "I understand, Tsunade-sama." The Jonin nodded in agreement, all too aware of how dire the consequences could be for everyone. He agreed that the risk was unjustified in any case, though the temptation was great. Temptation was temptation, but he understood that the Hokage would lock them away somewhere deep and for a long time, so no one would know, and then find a way to send them back. "Hey, can I ask you a question?" Obito interjected, jumping up and down impatiently, as if he'd just had a revelation. "Well, go ahead," Tsunade chuckled, looking kindly at the overly emotional Genin. Despite seeing what he had become, she couldn't accept this Uchiha Obito and that other. "Tell me, did I become Hokage?" the boy blurted out, causing the younger Kakashi, standing next to his teammate, to sigh in anguish and slap his face. "What?" Obito immediately turned to him, indignant, bracing himself for another altercation and ridicule. "It's nothing, Baka," he replied, looking at him like he was an idiot. "We were just walking through the village. Did you see your face on the mountain? Well, who knows? Maybe they haven't had time to build it yet." The boy responded indignantly, making all the adults smile. "Unfortunately, Obito, you didn't become Hokage, though you were undoubtedly a powerful shinobi." The Godame responded with a smile, trying to push the terrible memories deeper. "It hurt too much. Who better than the Hokage to know about losses? Who better than a mere nin to see faces distorted by death throes? Cooler than Minato-sensei?" Obito asked, a little displeased, but still interested. "It's hard to say," Shinja answered evasively, "but definitely strong." "See, Baka Kakashi," the boy remarked triumphantly, pointing a finger at the skeptically looking teenager. The little Hitaki didn't miss the Hokage's hesitation, especially since she didn't exactly try to hide it. Obito, I'm sure they just didn't want to upset you, little Kakashi calmly remarked. Especially since you never became Hokage, just like I predicted. Hey! Obito immediately pouted. Okay. A slap of her hand on the table immediately ended the childish squabble. The woman grinned, looking at the genin standing at attention before her and the much more calmly reacting Jonin, and continued. Stop arguing. What's important now is something else. I want to know the details of how you ended up in our time and figure out how to bring you back. Okay, I'll tell you. Minato nods in agreement, moving closer to the Hokage's desk. Sensei! Obito exclaimed indignantly. Our mission is to deliver this. The box and cracked pendant lay on the table. To Konoha and hand it over personally to the Hokage. He pauses for a moment, casting a stern glance at his students. Obito! Tsunade-sama is the Hokage. He turns back and bows his head slightly. My apologies. It's okay, I understand. Go on. Senju nods, trying not to notice Naruto appearing at the table, eyeing the pendant warily. He doesn't pick it up, though, just stares at it with a frown, making it immediately clear he's listening to something, or rather someone, that the others can't hear. This was found in the ruins near Rorin, he said, nodding toward the items stacked on the table. The search party was discovered by a Suda detachment and surrounded, and it was decided to request reinforcements from Konoha. My team and I were supposed to retrieve the find from them. Essentially, we were supposed to be simple couriers. An eloquent chuckle was his answer. Senju clearly understood how simple a courier mission could be in such a scenario. And deliver it all to the village. What stopped you? Tsunade looked closely at Minato. The box fell during transport, spilling its contents, and the pendant fell on top. Namikaze responded curtly, sensing that under Senju's watchful gaze, he wanted to repent of all his sins, but not wanting to expose his student. However, that wasn't necessary. Tsunade clearly understood how it had happened. The plates weren't dangerous. We couldn't sense chakra in them, so we carefully reassembled them, but suddenly the pendant glowed, and we ended up here. So it just lit up and went straight to Hazukijo. Naruto raised his eyebrows mockingly, tearing himself away from examining the intricate symbols on the box. Two blue eyes met identical ones, beginning a silent struggle. And Kurama says it needs to be held by a living person for it to work. What else does Kurama tell you? Tsunade immediately asked, distracting Uzumaki from their stare battle. Nothing specific, he wasn't interested, Naruto replied. He only remembers it was almost immediately after Madara left Konoha. He was supposedly looking for a way to change the past and stumbled upon the writings of a long-lost people. He never managed to find their city, though. Uzumaki shrugged. Kurama doesn't know anything else. Then how does he know he needs to touch it for it to work? Obito couldn't resist butting in. Who knows? Naruto grinned mockingly, looking at the genin with a quizzical expression. He's just telling me not to put my hands where I shouldn't. Look who's talking, Naruto. Sakura slaps the blonde on the back of the head. Sakura-chan, he said indignantly. She's right, Dobe. Sasuke chuckled, while Sai and the elder Kakashi just nodded in unison. Traitors, Uzumaki muttered under his breath. Okay. He slammed the tabletop again, and Senju glared at everyone present. Naruto, you need to question Kurama and find out everything you can. Hi. Uzumaki responded without much enthusiasm, not daring to argue, and he himself was curious. Minato, you need to tell us the whole story. It might help bring you back, Tsunade added calmly. Hi, Tsunade-sama. Namikaze nods in agreement. Shikamaru, take the data and engage the analysis department. Find a way to help them get back. Godame continued giving instructions. Hi. Nara drawled without much joy, and then, barely audibly, turned away. How problematic. Sakura, Sasuke, Kakashi, you'll be on standby, Tsunade said calmly, looking at Uzumaki, who had immediately perked up. Naruto, until everything is resolved, they'll be living with you. Bachan, Naruto said cautiously, indignantly. That's not up for discussion, Sinja barked, slamming the table. Any more questions? She glanced at everyone with an angry glare and, smirking, stated, No. Excellent. You're free to go. Tsunade-sama. Minato begins cautiously. We'll return the box and the broken pendant when we finish our research, the woman snapped. Get lost. No one argued with the slowly growing enraged Senju, not even Uzumaki, who was wildly displeased with what had happened. He clearly didn't want to invite uninvited guests into his home, but he couldn't go against a direct order, and his conscience wouldn't allow him to leave his own father sleeping on the street. A group of shinobi burst out of the Hokage's office at quite a decent speed. However, this no longer surprised anyone. Everyone knew the Senju's fiery nature all too well. Many were surprised by something else. Minato Namikaze wasn't the man anyone expected to see, especially leaving the Hokage's office at such speed, considering he had once been the Hokage himself. However, later everyone noticed Naruto next to him and calmed down. Konoha's most unpredictable ninja could pull off even worse. However, it was very unusual to see him absent-mindedly rubbing the back of his head right at the exit. He had a very lost look. Naruto, are you okay? Sakura asked him cautiously, looking at her friend with concern. Yes, he agreed, casting a dark glance at her and immediately hiding behind a carefree smile. Naruto, can I help you? Haruno tried again. You probably don't have anything at home except ramen again. Sakura-chan, no problem. We'll stop by the store on the way and buy everything. Uzumaki waved his hands at her. Who's going to cook? The girl asked provocatively. Or are you planning on feeding the guests ramen? This. Naruto smiled stupidly, scratching the back of his head, and then turned to his prospective tenants. Does anyone know how to cook? I a little, Rin said, embarrassed. You see, Sakura-chan. Uzumaki looked at Haruno with exaggerated cheerfulness. Rin-chan knows how to cook, so the only problem is the ingredients, but that's fixable. I'll send the clones now, and they'll buy everything. And they are. The girl tried to say something, but then Sasuke's hand fell on her shoulder. Sasuke-kun? The girl looked questioningly at the Uchiha, and, seeing him shake his head, closed her eyes in agreement. Yes, she knew she was only making things worse, but she couldn't help herself. She wanted to help, but Sasuke was right. This would only make things worse. Naruto was strong, and she shouldn't doubt him. You're right. Naruto, if you need anything, you know where to find me. Okay. Of course, Sakura-chan. Uzumaki nodded and waved his hand. See you later. The others quickly followed suit. Little Kakashi nodded, Rin bowed, Obito waved energetically, and Namikaze simply smiled and politely bid everyone farewell. Once again, his behavior surprised Sakura, who was accustomed to the blue-eyed blonde being much more energetic than Minato around her. So similar in appearance, yet so different on the inside. Sasuke-kun, Kakashi-sensei, Sai, do you think we did the right thing by leaving him alone with them? The pink-haired girl quietly asked the men standing nearby. There's nothing we can do, her former mentor calmly remarked. He needs to be alone with them to resolve his internal conflict. Internal conflict with oneself allows one to achieve a rethinking of one's inner principles, Sai remarked wisely. I read this in a book. You need to read less and talk to people more, Sakura sighed resignedly. Okay, I still have to stop by the hospital. See you later. While his friends debated whether or not to intervene, Naruto tried to get home as quickly as possible, not forgetting to go to the store, where four men obediently listened to the little Kunoichi's instructions, raking up the necessities from the shelves. There was almost a minor embarrassment at the checkout when Minato tried to pay for the groceries, but Uzumaki, noticing something was wrong, managed to restrain his father. It didn't bring him any particular happiness, though, only the understanding that he couldn't avoid unwanted attention. Uzumaki sighed wearily and waved his hand. He had plenty of problems without the gossiping gossips, one of which was his parents' room, which he still hadn't managed to redo. He only cleaned it, and it was probably the cleanest in the house. Not a speck of dust, not a speck of dirt, everything was just as his parents had left it. There were, of course, 3 other rooms, plus the living room and kitchen, but that was simpler. He changed them because there was nothing there that reminded him of his parents. All their personal belongings remained in the bedroom, which was protected by a barrier created by his mother, Kushina. "Here we are, come in," Uzumaki said a little tensely, noticing that he was already standing in front of the gate. "It's cozy," Rin noted, looking around. "This is my parents' house," Naruto responded calmly, unable to hold back a soft smile. "Where are they?" Obito asked bluntly, Uzumaki's smile instantly vanishing and a frown appearing on his face. "They died on my birthday." The answer was short and icy. Seeing the emotionless mask on the blonde's face was unpleasant and unusual. As far as the genin could tell, Naruto was a very emotional man, albeit one who knew how to control himself, but now his gaze was empty. "Sorry," Rin apologized immediately, and even Obito muttered something vaguely resembling an apology. Hearing this, Uzumaki chuckled vaguely. "It was a long time ago, and it doesn't matter anymore," he said calmly, and no one but the Kyuubi sealed within him knew how hard these words were for him. How much he wanted to give in to temptation and solve the problem as Kurama suggested, completely. "Come in." "Sorry for the intrusion," the guest muttered in surprising unison, looking around curiously and not noticing anything unusual about the room. So, a little cluttered, but not too bad. There were no dirty clothes lying around. Sakura was very strict about this, especially after she slipped on a half-empty ramen box one time while visiting Uzumaki, tripped over it, and fell, sending his dirty clothes flying, eventually earning herself a stylish hat shaped like his heart-patterned boxer shorts. There were no fast food boxes anywhere. He'd taken them to the trash shortly before the mission, and a few items were sloppily arranged, nothing more. He'd gotten a kick out of his kunoichi friends, and it was simply embarrassing to litter Naruto's parents' house. "There's 1 free room downstairs, 2 more upstairs," Naruto calmly noted, gesturing toward the doors as he unloaded the bags he was carrying into the adjacent kitchen and immediately headed back out, the others following his example. "The shower is nearby," he said, nodding toward the door between the kitchen and the room. "Who's going to move in? Can I come in?" Rin asked, opening the door and carefully examining the peach-hued room. "Sure, then the rest of you go to the 2nd floor," Uzumaki agreed, heading for the stairs. A couple of seconds and everyone was on the 2nd floor. "Here are 2 free rooms. Settle in as you wish." He pointed to the right side of the wide corridor, where 3 doors were visible. "The bathroom is at the very end. It's the only one on the entire floor." He chuckled and pointed to the doors on the opposite side of the corridor. "The far door is my room. I advise you not to go in there without a good reason. I'm nervous when I'm asleep, so I throw a kunai first, then look at who it's hitting." "What about the nearest door?" Obito asked naively, already pushing forward and impatiently surveying the identical rooms, which didn't even have beds, immediately becoming indignant. "And what are we going to sleep on?" "The closest one leads to my parents' bedroom." "Don't you dare go in there," Uzumaki replied icily, but then softened and added, "You can sleep in your sleeping bags or take futons from the closets." "I understand," Namikaze responded forever.